The gunshot echoed across the plains, sending a flock of startled crows into the darkening sky as Xander Calloway crouched behind a boulder, blood seeping through his fingers where he pressed them against his arm. The year was 1875, and the Nebraska Territory was as unforgiving as the men who sought to claim it. "Damn it all," Xander muttered, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind the wound. The bullet had only grazed him, but it stung like fire. At 32, he was no stranger to violence, having survived both the Civil War and a decade of riding the untamed western frontier. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, a testament to the hard years behind him. The wound dressed, he mounted his stallion and continued the final stretch toward his ranch outside Ogden, Nebraska. The settlement was small but growing, situated along the railroad that had brought both prosperity and problems to the region. Xander had purchased his land 5 years earlier, determined to build something that was his alone after years of drifting. The ranch was modest, a sturdy 2-story house, a corral, and a large stable that housed his prized horses. It sat nestled against rolling hills, with a creek running along the eastern border of his property. He'd built most of it with his own hands, occasionally hiring help from town when necessary, but largely keeping to himself. Night had fallen completely by the time he reached home. His arm throbbed as he led his horse into the stable, the familiar sense of hay and leather welcoming him. He'd just begun to unsaddle the animal when he heard a soft sound, almost imperceptible beneath the night wind. He froze, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Come out," he called, his voice low but carrying in the quiet stable. "I know you're there." Silence followed, then a rustling from the far stall. Xander drew his gun, approaching cautiously. "I won't ask again, please," came a whispered voice, distinctly feminine. "We mean no harm." Slowly, from behind the stacked hay bales, a woman emerged. Her dress was torn and dirty, her face smudged with dust and what looked like dried blood. Her dark blonde hair had fallen from its pins, hanging in tangled waves around shoulders that trembled visibly even in the dim lantern light. "We have nowhere else to go," she said, lifting her chin despite the fear evident in her eyes. "Just for tonight. We'll be gone by morning." Xander questioned, lowering his gun but not holstering it. The woman turned slightly, and 2 small faces appeared beside her, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8 and a younger boy, no more than 5. Both children had the same terrified expression, their eyes wide and wary. "I'm Dahlia Ashford," the woman said. "These are my children, Emma and Thomas." Xander studied them for a long moment. The children were thin, their clothes as dirty and worn as their mothers. The boy clutched a small wooden horse in one hand, the other fisted in his mother's skirt. "Why are you hiding in my stable, Mrs. Ashford?" "Miss," she corrected automatically, then seemed to regret speaking. We had to leave town quickly. There was trouble." "What kind of trouble brings a woman and 2 children to hide in a stranger's stable in the dead of night?" Dahlia hesitated, her eyes darting to the open stable door as if expecting someone to appear. "The kind that gets people killed, Mr. Calloway, Xander Calloway." He finally holstered his gun, noticing how the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "You're running from something." "Someone," she admitted. "My former employer. He wasn't who I thought he was." The little girl tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, I'm hungry." Dahlia's face crumpled for just an instant before she smoothed it into a reassuring smile. "I know, sweetheart, just a little longer." Xander sighed heavily, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. He'd built this place to be alone, to escape the complications of the world. The last thing he needed was a woman and 2 children bringing trouble to his door. "You can stay in the house tonight," he heard himself say. "There's food and you can clean up." The relief on Dahlia's face was immediate and profound. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. We won't be a bother, I promise." "It's just for tonight," he warned, not entirely sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. "Come morning, we'll figure something else out." The house was warm after Xander stoked the fire in the stone hearth. Dahlia stood just inside the door, her children pressed against her sides, taking in the sparse but clean living area with its simple furniture and minimal decorations. "The kitchen's through there," Xander pointed. Bedroom upstairs. You and the children can take my bed. I'll sleep down here." "That's not necessary, it is," he interrupted. "You look dead on your feet, all of you." He moved to a cupboard, pulling out bread, cheese, and some dried beef. "Eat something, then rest. Questions can wait until morning." Dahlia nodded, guiding her children to the table. The boy Thomas still clutched his wooden horse while Emma kept one hand firmly in her mother's. They ate silently but hungrily, and Xander found himself watching them from his position by the fire. "There's a pump out back for water," he said after a while, "and clean linens in the chest upstairs. You're very kind, Mr. Calloway." "No," he corrected, "I'm not. But I'm not the type to turn away children in the night, either." Later, after they had washed and gone upstairs, Xander sat in his chair by the dying fire, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The woman was clearly in some kind of trouble, serious enough to flee with her children into the night. He should send them on their way come morning, direct them to town where the church ladies could help them, but even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't. There was something in Dahlia Ashford's eyes, a determination, a fierce protectiveness that had reached past his carefully constructed walls. And the children? He hadn't been around children much since his own childhood, but their silent fear had stirred something long dormant in him. Morning came with a clarity that did nothing to simplify the situation. Xander woke early, as was his habit, and found Dahlia already in the kitchen, attempting to prepare breakfast with the limited supplies available. "You didn't need to do that," he said, startling her. She turned, a strand of hair falling across her face. She'd washed it the night before. It shone golden in the early light. "It's the least I can do. You've been more than generous." Xander moved past her to put coffee on the stove. "Your children still sleeping?" "Yes, they were exhausted." She hesitated. "Mr. Calloway, about what I said last night, about your former employer," he measured coffee grounds carefully. "I figure you'll tell me when you're ready, or you won't, and you'll be on your way after breakfast." "That's just it," Dahlia said quietly. "I don't know where to go. We left everything behind in town. I had a position as housekeeper for Mr. Richards, but when I discovered what he was really involved in, which was smuggling, weapons mostly, using his shipping business as cover." She twisted her hands in her apron, his apron, he realized, one she must have found in the kitchen. "When he realized I knew, he threatened the children, said he'd take them if I spoke a word to anyone." Xander leaned against the counter, studying her. "So you ran, in the middle of the night. Took what I could carry and the children and just left." Her eyes met his, steady despite the fear evident in them. "He'll be looking for us. He has connections throughout the county. That's why we were hiding, trying to figure out where to go next." "This Richards," Xander said slowly. "George Richards, owns the big house on the north edge of Ogden," Dahlia nodded. "You know him?" "Know of him. Never had reason to do business with the man." Xander poured the boiling water over the coffee grounds. "He's got influence, right enough. Money talks in these parts, same as everywhere." "Then you understand why we can't stay in Ogden." Dahlia's voice dropped as footsteps sounded on the stairs. "The children don't know everything. I've tried to shield them." The little girl, Emma, appeared in the doorway, her brother trailing behind her. They'd both been cleaned up, their faces showing a healthy glow that had been obscured by dirt the night before. Emma had her mother's golden hair, while Thomas had darker locks that curled around his ears. "Good morning," Emma said politely, though her eyes remained cautious as they settled on Xander. "Morning," he replied, feeling oddly formal. "Your mother's making breakfast." Thomas edged closer to his sister. "Is this your house, mister?" "It is. It's big. Bigger than our room at Mr. Richards's house." Xander glanced at Dahlia, who had gone still at the mention of Richards. "That's so. Well, you're welcome to look around after breakfast if you'd like." The children ate with the same hungry intensity as the night before, and Xander found himself wondering how long it had been since they'd had regular meals. Dahlia ate little, pushing food around her plate, her mind clearly elsewhere. "I need to go into town today," Xander said as they finished. "Get supplies. You should stay here out of sight." "We can't impose. You're not imposing if I'm offering." He stood, collecting his hat from the hook by the door. "Like I said, Richards has influence. Best if no one knows you're here until we figure something out." "We." Dahlia's voice was soft with surprise. Xander paused, realizing what he'd said. He hadn't intended to get involved beyond providing shelter for a night, yet here he was, already thinking of their problem as shared. "Just stay inside," he said, avoiding the question in her eyes. "I'll be back before sundown." Ogden was busier than usual, the main street crowded with wagons and riders. Xander hitched his horse outside the general store and went inside, nodding to the proprietor, Samuel Jenkins. Xander. "Twice in a month must be a special occasion," Sam joked, coming around the counter to shake hands. "Just running low on supplies," Xander replied, beginning to gather what he needed. He added extra flour, sugar, and coffee items he usually bought in smaller quantities given that he lived alone. "Heard about any trouble in town lately?" he asked casually as Sam totaled his purchases. The storekeeper looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "What kind of trouble you mean? Any kind. Been keeping to myself at the ranch, but thought I heard gunfire on the North Road yesterday." Sam leaned in, lowering his voice. "Well, since you mention it, there was some commotion at the Richards place. Story is his housekeeper robbed him blind and took off. He's offering a reward for information." Xander kept his expression neutral. "That's so." "Wouldn't have thought a housekeeper would have access to anything worth stealing." "That's the curious part. Richards is saying it was important papers, business documents, but folks are talking, you know how it is. Some say she found something she shouldn't have. Others say he had his eye on her in ways that weren't proper, her being a widow with young ones and all." "She have family around these parts?" Sam shook his head. "Not that anyone knows, showed up about a year ago looking for work." "Richards hired her right off," which raised some eyebrows given how particular he usually is. Xander paid for his supplies, adding a few candies to his purchases almost as an afterthought. "Appreciate the information, Sam. You see anything suspicious out your way, you let the sheriff know." Richards has his men searching all the roads and properties around town. The ride back to the ranch was tense, Xander keeping a sharp eye out for any riders that might be searching the area. He took a longer, less direct route, using the hills to obscure his approach to his own property. The house appeared quiet when he returned, but as soon as he entered, Thomas came running from the kitchen, his wooden horse in hand. "Mr. Calloway, look what I found in your yard." The boy held up a feather, iridescent blue-black. "Mama says it's from a magpie." Despite himself, Xander smiled. "That's right, they nest in the old oak by the creek." Dahlia appeared behind her son, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry. I told them to stay inside, but they needed some air and I thought just in the yard would be safe." "It's fine," Xander said, setting down his supplies. "But I heard in town that Richards has men searching the area. You'll need to be more careful." Her face paled. "He's looking for us." "Yes." Xander hesitated, then added, "He's saying you stole from him important papers." Dahlia's laugh was bitter. "Of course he is. That would be easier than admitting the truth." "Which is," she glanced at Thomas, then back at Xander. "Later," she mouthed. Later came after the children were in bed, the house quiet except for the crackling of the fire. Dahlia sat across from Xander, a cup of coffee warming her hands. "I did take something," she admitted. "Proof of what he's doing. I found account books in his study, records of shipments that didn't match what was supposedly being transported, and there were letters, correspondence with men I know are not reputable businessmen." "You took these documents?" She nodded. "They're hidden, I thought. I could use them to keep him away from us. But then I realized how dangerous that was. He wouldn't just let me go, not with what I know." "So why not go to the sheriff?" Dahlia's eyes met his, steady and serious. "Because the sheriff dines at Richards's table every Sunday. Because his daughter is engaged to Richards's nephew. Because in this town, money and power speak louder than a housekeeper's accusations." Xander couldn't argue with her assessment. He'd seen enough of the world to know how it worked, especially in frontier towns where law was still a flexible concept. "What's your plan, then? You can't run forever with 2 children." "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I thought perhaps we could reach Denver or even California, start fresh where no one knows us. That takes money. I have a little saved, not much, but enough to get us started elsewhere." Xander stared into the fire, weighing his next words carefully. "You could stay here. For a while at least, until things settle." Dahlia looked up sharply. "We can't ask that of you." "You're not asking, I'm offering." He wasn't sure why he was doing it, except that something about Dahlia Ashford and her children had gotten under his skin in a way nothing had for years. The ranch is isolated enough. People don't come out this way much. Richards wouldn't think to look here. Why would you help us? You don't know me. It was a fair question, one Xander had been asking himself since he'd first decided to let them stay the night. Let's just say I understand what it's like to need a fresh start, and I've got the space. Dahlia studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you. We won't overstay our welcome, I promise. But as days turned into a week and then two, the arrangement began to feel less temporary. The children, initially shy around Xander, gradually warmed to him. Emma, serious and thoughtful like her mother, began to follow him around, asking questions about the ranch and the horses. Thomas, more exuberant, attached himself to Xander with the uncomplicated affection of a child, sitting beside him at meals and showing him treasures found in the yard rocks, feathers, once a toad that had sent Dahlia shrieking from the kitchen in surprise. And Dahlia. She transformed the house in subtle ways. Curtains appeared at windows that had been bare, small touches of decoration softened the stark rooms, and the smell of baking filled the air more often than not. She insisted on earning her keep, taking over household tasks and even learning to help with some of the ranch work. They settled into a rhythm, an unexpected domesticity that Xander found surprisingly comfortable. He'd lived alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it was like to have conversation over meals, to hear laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for years. One evening, about a month after they'd arrived, Xander returned from checking fences to find Dahlia in the yard, hanging laundry. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning it to burnished gold, and he found himself pausing to watch her. She was humming softly, a melody he didn't recognize, and there was a piece about her that hadn't been there when they first met. "You're staring, Mr. Calloway," she said without turning. Xander, he corrected automatically. They'd had this exchange before. "After a month of sharing a home, I think you can use my given name." She turned then, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Xander, then, dinner's almost ready. Where are the children?" "Emma is reading to Thomas in the front room. She's been teaching him his letters." Pride colored her voice. "She's quite the little teacher." Xander moved to help her with the last of the laundry. "She reminds me of you, same determined look when she sets her mind to something." Dahlia laughed. "Is that how you see me? Determined, among other things." He handed her a clothespin. "Brave, resilient, stubborn as all get out when you think you're right. I'm not stubborn, I'm principled. That's just a fancy word for stubborn." Their hands brushed as she took the clothespin, and a current seemed to pass between them, subtle but unmistakable. Dahlia's smile faltered, her eyes meeting his with a question in them that neither was ready to voice. The moment was broken by Thomas calling from the house, announcing that he was hungry in the direct way of children. Dahlia stepped back, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture Xander had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I should get dinner on the table," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal. Xander nodded, watching her hurry toward the house. He remained in the yard a moment longer, trying to make sense of the feeling that had come over him, a mixture of contentment and unease. The contentment he understood, the unease was harder to define. It wasn't until later, lying in his makeshift bed in the small room off the kitchen, he'd insisted Dahlia and the children keep the upstairs bedroom, that he identified it. For the first time in years, he had something to lose. The quiet, solitary life he'd built was changing, reshaping itself around three people who had appeared in his stable on a dark night and somehow become essential. And that was dangerous, because Dahlia Ashford was still running from a powerful man who wouldn't forget what she knew or what she'd taken. The next morning brought clouds and the promise of rain, a welcome sight after weeks of dry weather. Xander was in the barn repairing tack when Emma found him. "Mama sent me to tell you dinner will be ready soon," she said, perching on a hay bale with the easy grace of childhood. "Thank you, Miss Emma," he replied, using the formal address that always made her giggle. "I'll be along shortly." Instead of leaving, she watched him work, her small face serious. "Mr. Calloway?" "Yes. Are we going to stay here forever?" The question caught him off guard. "Aye, that's something for your mother to decide." But you'd let us, she pressed, if Mama wanted to. Xander set down his work, giving the girl his full attention. Do you want to stay here? Emma nodded emphatically. Thomas loves the horses, and I like having so much space to explore, and Mama smiles more here. She didn't smile much at Mr. Richards's house. Is that so? She was always worried there, I could tell, even though she tried to hide it. Emma's perception was startling for a child her age. But she's different here. She laughs more, and she looks at you the way Mrs. Jenkins looks at Mr. Jenkins in town. Xander felt heat rise in his face. Emma, I saw them when we went to church, she continued, oblivious to his discomfort. Mrs. Jenkins was holding Mr. Jenkins's arm and looking up at him all soft, like Mama looks at you when you're not watching. Before Xander could formulate a response to this revelation, Dahlia's voice called from the house, summoning them for dinner. Emma hopped off the hay bale, apparently satisfied with having delivered both her mother's message and her own observations. Coming. She called, then turned back to Xander. You won't tell Mama what I said, will you? She'd be embarrassed. It'll be our secret, he promised, collecting himself. Go on now. Throughout dinner, Xander found himself watching Dahlia, looking for signs of what Emma had described. Dahlia was animated, describing a book she'd found on his shelf that detailed the history of the territory, but he couldn't detect anything beyond the friendly comfort that had developed between them over the past month. Had Emma imagined it? Or was he simply blind to what the child had seen so clearly? After the children were in bed, Dahlia joined him on the porch where he sat watching the rain that had finally begun to fall. She handed him a cup of coffee and settled into the chair beside his. Emma was chatty at dinner, she commented. What were you two discussing in the barn? Xander sipped his coffee, buying time. She asked if you all would be staying here, permanently. Dahlia stilled. Oh, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. We've imposed on your hospitality for too long already. It's not an imposition. Even so, we should move on soon. Richards hasn't come looking here, Xander interrupted. It's been over a month, maybe he's given up. The look Dahlia gave him was gently chiding. You don't believe that any more than I do. Men like George Richards don't give up when their pride is wounded. Then we'll deal with him if he comes. Her voice was soft, questioning. Xander set down his cup and turned to face her fully. Yes, unless you want to leave. It's not about what I want. Dahlia's hands twisted in her lap. It's about what's safe for my children, what's fair to you. What if I want you to stay? The words came out before he could stop them, hanging in the damp air between them. Dahlia's eyes widened, searching his face. Xander. I know it hasn't been long, he continued, committed now, and I know there are complications, but having you and the children here, it's changed things, for the better. We've disrupted your life. You've improved it. He reached across the space between them, tentatively covering her hand with his. I've been alone a long time, Dahlia. I thought that's what I wanted. Now I'm not so sure. She didn't pull away, but her expression was troubled. I can't ask you to take on my problems. Richards is dangerous. I'm no stranger to dangerous men. He squeezed her hand gently. And I'm not asking for decisions tonight. Just think about staying, not as guests, but as what? She prompted when he hesitated. As family, he finished, if that's something you might want. Dahlia's eyes shone in the lamplight, and for a moment Xander feared he'd overstepped, but then her hand turned beneath his, fingers intertwining. Emma asked me last week if you could be her new papa, she said, her voice barely audible above the rain. I told her it wasn't that simple. Isn't it? Xander asked. Maybe the children see things more clearly than we do. Dahlia smiled, a small, hopeful expression. Maybe they do, but there's still the matter of Richards. We'll face that together when the time comes. The next morning dawned clear after the rain, the world washed clean and bright. Xander rose early as usual, but found Dahlia already in the kitchen, her hair loose around her shoulders as she prepared breakfast. You're up early, he commented, suddenly aware of a new awkwardness between them after their conversation the night before. She turned, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I couldn't sleep, too much on my mind. Second thoughts, no, she said quickly, not about what we discussed. But I've been thinking about Richards, about what to do with the evidence I took. Xander poured himself coffee. What are your options? I could destroy it, pretend I never saw anything. She shook her head. But that feels wrong. He'd still be free to continue his operations hurting people. Or I could find a way to get the information to someone who can actually do something about it, someone beyond Richards's influence. Xander considered this. The federal marshal comes through every few months. He answers to Denver, not local authorities. When is he due next? Not for a while, I'd guess, but there's a telegraph office in North Platte. We could send word, explain the situation. Dahlia's expression brightened. Would you help me write the message? I'm not sure how to explain everything briefly enough for a telegram. Of course. Xander hesitated, then added, but you should know, once we do this, there's no turning back if Richards finds out. I know the risks, she said firmly, but I also know I can't build a new life with this hanging over us. The children deserve better, we all do. The "we" wasn't lost on Xander, and he felt a surge of something warm and unfamiliar in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or the beginnings of something deeper that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. We'll ride to North Platte tomorrow, he decided. The children can stay with Mrs. Wilson at the next ranch over. She's been asking to meet them anyway. Dahlia nodded, relief evident in her posture. Thank you, Xander, for everything. The day passed in preparation for their trip to North Platte. Xander repaired the wagon while Dahlia gathered the documents she'd hidden upon their arrival sewn into the lining of Emma's doll, a hiding place so ordinary no one would think to look there. The children were excited about visiting Mrs. Wilson, who was known throughout the area for her apple pies and kind disposition. Her husband had passed several years earlier, leaving her to manage their small ranch with the help of her grown son, who lived in a cabin on the property. Will Mrs. Wilson have kittens like you said? Thomas asked as Dahlia packed a small bag for their overnight stay. She might. She has several cats to keep the mice away from her grain stores. And will we really come back here after? Emma's question held more weight than her brother's, her eyes serious as she looked between her mother and Xander. Dahlia knelt beside her daughter. Yes, Emma, this is our home now. We just need to take care of some business in North Platte. With the bad man, the one we ran away from. Dahlia exchanged a glance with Xander. Not exactly. We're going to send a message to people who can help make sure the bad man doesn't bother us anymore. Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation and returned to helping her brother gather his toys for the visit. Dahlia straightened, her face troubled. They understand more than I give them credit for, she said quietly to Xander. Children often do. He picked up the bag she'd packed. But they also trust you to protect them, and you've done that every step of the way. The ride to the Wilson ranch was pleasant, the air fresh after the rain. Mrs. Wilson greeted them warmly, ushering the children inside with promises of cookies and stories. She was a plump, cheerful woman in her 60s with silver hair and lively blue eyes. You two go on and take care of your business, she said, shooing Dahlia and Xander toward the door after they'd settled the children. Emma and Thomas will be just fine here. We'll be back tomorrow afternoon, Dahlia promised, hugging her children. Be good for Mrs. Wilson. I will, Mama, Emma said solemnly, and I'll watch Thomas too. Thomas was already exploring the large kitchen, his attention caught by the orange tabby cat watching from atop a cupboard. Back in the wagon, Dahlia was quiet, her thoughts clearly with her children despite the short separation. Xander drove steadily, keeping the horses at an even pace that would get them to North Platte by nightfall. Mrs. Wilson seems wonderful, Dahlia said after a while. Have you known her long? Since I bought the ranch. Her husband helped me repair the roof that first winter before he passed. She's good people. Emma and Thomas took to her right away. They're usually more cautious with strangers. Children can sense who's trustworthy, same as horses. Xander glanced at her. Just like they've taken to the ranch, to our arrangement, Dahlia smiled slightly. Is that what we're calling it? An arrangement, for now, unless you have another word in mind. Courtship seems old-fashioned, she mused, and romance sounds like something from a novel. How about beginning, Xander suggested. A beginning that might lead to something more permanent if that's what we both want. Dahlia's smile widened. I like that. A beginning. North Platte was considerably larger than Ogden, with several hotels, a proper courthouse, and businesses that lined the main street in neat rows. Xander directed the wagon to a modest hotel near the telegraph office, helping Dahlia down from her seat. We should get a room for the night, then see about sending that telegram, he said, conscious that they would be sharing accommodations for the first time. As if reading his thoughts, Dahlia added, 2 rooms, I think. Of course, Xander agreed quickly. I didn't mean to imply I know you didn't, she assured him, amusement in her eyes, but people talk and I'd rather not give them reason to. The telegraph office was still open when they arrived, the operator a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. Xander explained they needed to send an urgent message to the federal marshal's office in Denver. Got paper here, the man said, sliding a form across the counter. Keep it brief, though. Costs by the word. Dahlia and Xander worked together to compose a message that explained the situation without revealing too many specifics. It mentioned evidence of weapons smuggling, the name Richards, and requested immediate investigation. They signed it with both their names and included the location of Xander's ranch. That should reach Denver by morning, the operator said, counting out their payment. Any reply would come tomorrow, most likely. Thank you, Dahlia said, relief evident in her voice as they left the office. Now we wait. They had dinner at a small restaurant near the hotel, both aware of the significance of this first meal together away from the ranch and the children. It felt almost like a proper courtship, Xander thought, watching Dahlia in the candlelight. She'd changed into her best dress for the trip, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color in her eyes. You look beautiful tonight, he said, the words feeling awkward in his mouth after so long without speaking them to anyone. Dahlia blushed, the color becoming on her fair skin. Thank you. It's been a while since I had occasion to dress for dinner. We could make it a regular occurrence, he suggested. Once a month we could ride into Ogden for dinner, just the 2 of us, like a proper couple. Her eyes twinkled, exactly like that. Xander reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I want to do this right, Dahlia. You and the children, you've become important to me, more than I expected. And you to us, she replied softly. Emma and Thomas adore you, and she paused, gathering her courage. I find myself thinking of a future I hadn't dared hope for since their father died. Xander felt a tightness in his chest at her words. I want to be part of that future if you'll have me, even with all the complications, especially with all the complications. They're what make it real. They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, the night air cool around them. At Dahlia's door, Xander hesitated, wanting to kiss her but aware they were in public view in the hotel hallway. Dahlia solved his dilemma by rising on her tiptoes and pressing a quick, soft kiss to his cheek. Good night, Xander. I'll see you in the morning. Good night, he replied, touching his cheek where her lips had been as she closed the door. Morning brought sunshine and a reply from Denver. The telegraph operator handed over the message with a curious look, clearly interested in what had warranted such a rapid response. Marshal Briggs will arrive Ogden 3 days stop, Xander read aloud once they were outside. Requests evidence be secured stop will investigate allegations personally stop, Dahlia exhaled shakily. 3 days, it's really happening. Are you ready for this? There's no going back once Briggs arrives. I'm ready, she said firmly. Richards needs to be stopped. And we need to be free of this shadow hanging over us. They collected the wagon and began the journey back to the Wilson Ranch, both feeling lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. The road stretched before them, empty and peaceful, belying the confrontation that awaited their return to Ogden. What will you tell the children? Xander asked as they traveled. Dahlia considered the question. The truth, I think, but simplified, that a lawman is coming to help us with the bad man and that soon we won't need to worry about him anymore. And about us, about our beginning. She smiled, the expression warming him more than the sun overhead. I think they already know in their way, but yes, I'll talk to them about that too, about how you're going to be part of our lives permanently if that's truly what you want. It is, Xander said simply, more than anything. They reached the Wilson Ranch by mid-afternoon to find Emma and Thomas playing in the yard with Mrs. Wilson's grandson, who had arrived that morning. The children ran to greet them, full of stories about kittens and cookies and the pony they'd been allowed to ride. They've been angels, Mrs. Wilson assured Dahlia. Such well-mannered children, you're welcome to visit anytime. After thanking her profusely, they loaded the children and their belongings into the wagon and set off for home. Emma, perceptive as always, noticed the change in atmosphere between her mother and Xander. "Did you have a good trip?" she asked, watching them closely. "We did," Dahlia replied, "and we have some news. A marshal is coming to help us with our problem." "The bad man?" "Yes, Emma, and also." She glanced at Xander, who nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Calloway and I have decided that we'd like to be a family, all of us together." Emma's face lit up, but Thomas looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," Xander explained, "that I'd like to marry your mother if she'll have me. And that you and Emma would be my children, just as if I were your father." Thomas considered this with the seriousness of a child making an important decision. "Would we still live at the ranch with the horses?" "Yes," Xander laughed. "We'd still live at the ranch." "Then that's all right," Thomas declared, as if his approval was the final word on the matter. Emma was more restrained in her reaction, though her eyes shone with happiness. "I knew it," she said softly to Xander when Dahlia was distracted with Thomas. "I told you Mama looked at you special." Xander winked at her. "You were right, Miss Emma. You saw it before I did." The ranch looked exactly as they had left it, peaceful in the late afternoon sun. Xander helped Dahlia and the children down from the wagon, the gesture familiar now after months of living together, yet somehow different with their new understanding. "Home," Dahlia said, the word holding new meaning. "It feels right saying that." "It is right," Xander agreed. "This is where you belong, where we all belong." The next 3 days passed in a blend of anticipation and preparation. Dahlia retrieved the hidden documents, organizing them for Marshal Briggs's arrival. Xander made sure the ranch was in perfect order, an instinctive response to the coming of authority. The children, sensing the importance of what was happening, were on their best behavior, though Thomas couldn't resist asking endless questions about the marshal and whether he would wear a star like in the stories Emma read to him. On the morning Briggs was expected, Xander found Dahlia in the kitchen, staring out the window with tension evident in her posture. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, just preparing myself. I've been running and hiding for so long." "It's strange to think of facing it directly. You won't be facing it alone." He moved behind her, tentatively placing his hands on her shoulders. "Whatever happens, we're in this together now." Dahlia leaned back against him, the trust in the gesture making his heart swell. "I know. That's what gives me courage." Marshal James Briggs arrived precisely when expected, his horse dusty from the road as he approached the ranch house. He was a tall man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor that commanded respect without words. "Mr. Calloway," he greeted Xander on the porch, "and you must be Miss Ashford." "Thank you for coming, Marshal," Dahlia said, shaking his offered hand. "Let's talk inside," Briggs suggested, his sharp eyes taking in the ranch and the 2 children watching curiously from the window. Once seated at the kitchen table, Dahlia laid out the documents she'd taken from Richards's study. Briggs examined them carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is more extensive than I expected," he said finally. "Richards has connections that reach beyond Nebraska territory. These shipments." He tapped a list of dates and locations. "These align with reports we've received of weapons being supplied to renegade groups stirring up trouble with the Indian tribes." "He's been doing this for years," Dahlia explained. "I only discovered it by accident. He left his study unlocked one evening and I was bringing in tea, and when he realized you knew, he threatened my children. Said he'd take them if I breathed a word to anyone." Briggs nodded, unsurprised. Men like Richards use power to intimidate, but this evidence, combined with investigations already underway, it's enough to bring him in. "Will it be dangerous?" Xander asked. "For Dahlia and the children?" "I won't lie to you, Richards won't go quietly." Briggs looked between them. "But I've brought men with me. They're securing the town as we speak. By nightfall, Richards will be in custody. And then," Dahlia's voice was steady despite the stakes, "then you'll need to testify, in Denver most likely. Your testimony, combined with these documents, will be crucial." Xander felt a surge of protectiveness. "She'll need protection, we all will." "Arranged," Briggs assured them. The judge has already authorized a protective detail until the trial is concluded. After Briggs left with the documents, promising to return by evening with news, Dahlia sat heavily in a chair, the tension of the meeting finally catching up with her. "It's really happening," she said, wonder in her voice. "After all this time." Xander knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "You did it, Dahlia, you stood up to him." "We did it," she corrected. "I wouldn't have had the courage without you." The children, who had been playing quietly in the other room under strict instructions not to interrupt, now peered around the doorway. "Is the marshal gone?" Emma asked. "Can we come out now?" "Yes, come here, both of you." Dahlia opened her arms and the children rushed to her. "The marshal is going to help us. Soon we won't have to worry about the bad man anymore. And then we can be a real family," Thomas asked, looking between his mother and Xander. "Yes," Xander said, including himself in the embrace. "Then we can be a real family." The wait for Briggs's return was agonizing. Xander kept his rifle close, watching the road for any sign of approaching riders. Dahlia tried to maintain normalcy for the children's sake, but her frequent glances toward the window betrayed her anxiety. Finally, as the sun began to set, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Xander stepped onto the porch, rifle ready, until he recognized Briggs's tall figure. "It's done," the marshal announced without preamble as he dismounted. "Richards is in custody, along with several of his associates. We found more evidence in his home enough to ensure he'll be facing federal charges." The relief that washed over Dahlia was visible, her shoulders dropping as if a physical weight had been lifted. "He didn't resist, he tried," Briggs said grimly, "but we were prepared, no one was seriously hurt." "And now?" Xander asked. "Now Miss Ashford will need to come to Denver in 2 weeks' time to give her formal testimony. After that, it will be in the hands of the courts." Briggs removed his hat, a more personal gesture than anything he'd done previously. "You showed great courage, Miss Ashford. Not many would have done what you did." "I had something worth fighting for," she replied, glancing back at the house where her children waited. "A future." After Briggs departed, promising to send word when the exact date for testimony was set, Xander and Dahlia stood together on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. He slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "So," he said, "Denver in 2 weeks?" "Yes." She leaned against him. "Will you come with me?" "Try to stop me." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Maybe while we're there, we could make other arrangements as well." Dahlia looked up at him questioningly. "There are churches in Denver," Xander explained, "and judges who can perform ceremonies." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by joy. "Xander Calloway, is that a proposal?" "I believe I already proposed, Miss Ashford. This is merely a suggestion about timing." His eyes crinkled with humor. "Unless you'd prefer a more formal request, I could get down on one knee right here." "No," she laughed, stopping him with a hand on his arm. "Your first proposal was perfect, and yes, I think arranging a wedding while we're in Denver is an excellent idea." "Then it's settled." He drew her closer. 2 weeks from now, you'll give your testimony, Richards will face justice, and you'll become Mrs. Calloway. And the children will officially be yours as well," she added softly. A family, he repeated, the word filling his heart. "Something I never thought I'd have again. Again." Dahlia looked up, curiosity in her eyes. "You've never spoken of your past." Xander sighed, knowing it was time to share the parts of himself he'd kept hidden. "I was married once before the war. Her name was Catherine. She died in childbirth while I was fighting, the baby too." "Oh, Xander." Dahlia's hand came up to touch his face. "I'm so sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, though the pain had never fully disappeared. "When I came west after the war, I thought I'd live out my days alone, didn't think I deserved another chance. And now I know better." He turned to face her fully. "What happened in the past shaped me, but it doesn't define my future, our future." Dahlia stood on tiptoes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held promise and healing in equal measure. When they parted, her eyes shone with unshed tears and something deeper, a love that had grown steadily over the months they'd spent together. "Our future," she echoed. "It has a nice ring to it." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Xander arranged for Mrs. Wilson to stay with the children while they traveled to Denver, purchased new clothes for all of them for the journey, and made inquiries about accommodations in the city. Dahlia, meanwhile, worked with Briggs through correspondence to prepare her testimony, determined to ensure Richards would face the full consequences of his actions. Emma and Thomas were excited about the upcoming trip, though they understood only that their mother was going to help the marshal and that there would be a special ceremony that would make Xander their new father. "Will I have to call you father?" Emma asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing. "You can call me whatever makes you comfortable," Xander replied. "Xander is fine, or Pa, or anything else you choose." Emma considered this with her usual thoughtfulness. I think I'd like to call you Pa." "Thomas doesn't remember our real father, but I do a little. It feels right to have a Pa again." Xander felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'd be honored, Emma, and I want you to know I'm not trying to replace your father. He'll always be part of you. I know." She leaned against him with the simple trust of childhood. "But you're part of us now, too." The morning they were to leave for Denver, Dahlia found Xander in the stable, checking the wagon one last time. "The children are ready," she said. "Mrs. Wilson arrived a few minutes ago." "Good." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "We should reach the station in time for the noon train." Dahlia nodded, then stepped closer, a hint of nervousness in her movement. "Before we go, I wanted to give you something." She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Xander took it, curious, and unwrapped it to find a silver pocket watch, simple but elegant. "It was my father's," she explained. "One of the few things I kept when we fled. I've been saving it for the right time." Xander opened the watch, noting the inscription inside, "Time reveals truth." "My father used to say that," Dahlia continued, "that no matter what happens, time eventually brings truth to light. It seemed fitting given everything we've been through." "It's perfect," Xander said, deeply moved by the gesture. "I'll treasure it." "I know it's traditional for the groom to give a gift, not receive one," but he silenced her with a gentle kiss. "Traditions are made to be adapted, and you've already given me more than I ever thought to have again." The journey to Denver was long but uneventful, the train carrying them through changing landscapes as Nebraska's plains gave way to Colorado's more rugged terrain. They arrived in the evening, checking into a respectable hotel that Briggs had recommended. Denver was a bustling city compared to Ogden, with gas lamps illuminating the streets and buildings reaching several stories high. Despite her fatigue from travel, Dahlia was wide-eyed at the sights and sounds of the city. "It's been years since I've been anywhere this size," she admitted as they walked to their rooms. "Not since before the children were born. We'll have time to explore after the testimony," Xander promised. "Show the children some of the city before we head back home." The word came easily now, carrying with it images of their shared life: breakfast at the kitchen table, evenings on the porch, the children playing in the yard. A life he hadn't known he wanted until it appeared unexpectedly in his stable that night months ago. Briggs met them the next morning, escorting Dahlia to the federal building where her testimony would be heard. Xander waited outside the closed doors, pacing the hallway for the 3 hours she was inside. When she finally emerged, her face was pale but composed, her posture straight and dignified. "It's done," she said simply. "They have everything they need." Briggs, following behind her, nodded in confirmation. Miss Ashford's testimony was compelling and precise. Combined with the documentary evidence, it's more than enough to ensure Richards faces the maximum penalty. "And his threats against Dahlia and the children added to his charges." Briggs's expression was grim but satisfied. "He won't see freedom for many years, Mr. Calloway. Your family is safe. Your family." The words settled over Xander like a blessing. "Thank you, Marshal, for everything." "Just doing my job." Briggs tipped his hat to Dahlia. "Madam, the court will contact you if anything else is needed, but I expect that won't be necessary." After Briggs departed, Xander took Dahlia's arm, guiding her toward the building's exit. "How are you feeling?" "Relieved, exhausted." She leaned against him slightly. "But mostly free. For the first time in so long, I feel truly free." "Then there's only one thing left to do while we're here," Xander said, smiling down at her. "Unless you've changed your mind about marrying you." Dahlia's eyes sparkled despite her fatigue. "Not a chance, Mr. Calloway. Not a chance." The ceremony took place 2 days later in a small church near their hotel. It was simple but meaningful, with just the four of them present: Xander, Dahlia, Emma, and Thomas. The minister was a kind older man who had been touched by their story and agreed to perform the ceremony on short notice. Dahlia wore a new dress of pale blue, with flowers in her hair that Emma had helped select from a local florist. The children were dressed in their finest clothes, Thomas fidgeting with his collar until Xander knelt to help him adjust it. "Remember what we practiced?" Xander asked the boy. Thomas nodded solemnly. "I give Mama to you and Emma gives the rings." "That's right." Xander smoothed the boy's hair. "You're the man of the family until I take over, so it's an important job." This responsibility straightened Thomas's small shoulders, his chest puffing out with pride. "I can do it." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Thomas performed his role with dignity, solemnly placing his mother's hand in Xander's when asked, "Who gives this woman?" Emma presented the simple gold bands they'd purchased in Denver, her eyes shining with happiness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed Dahlia with a tenderness that spoke of all they'd overcome to reach this moment. Then he knelt to embrace the children, including them in the circle of his arms. "We're a family now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Officially and forever." "Forever," Emma echoed, the word a promise. They celebrated with a special dinner at the hotel restaurant, the children unusually well behaved as they savored the occasion and the unfamiliar fancy food. Afterward, Mrs. Wilson, who had traveled to Denver for the ceremony, took the children to her room for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy. Alone in their hotel room, Dahlia stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Xander moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Mrs. Calloway," he murmured. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," she replied, leaning back against him, "like it was always meant to be mine." They returned to the ranch a week later, the trip back feeling different, a family returning home rather than individuals facing an uncertain future. The house welcomed them, familiar and yet somehow new in light of their changed status. Mrs. Wilson had prepared the house for their return, with fresh flowers on the table and a meal waiting to be heated. But the most significant change was upstairs, where the spare room had been transformed into a proper bedroom for the children, leaving the master bedroom for Xander and Dahlia. "She's been busy," Dahlia commented, touching the new curtains in the children's room. "I may have sent a telegram asking for her help," Xander admitted. "Wanted everything to be ready for our return." That night, after the children were asleep, Xander and Dahlia sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear in the vast Nebraska sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in a posture that had become natural over the months. "I never thought that night in the stable that we'd end up here," Dahlia said softly. "I was so scared, so desperate. And I was so determined to be alone," Xander replied. "Funny how life changes when you least expect it. Do you ever regret it, letting us stay?" Xander turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Not for a single moment. You and the children, you saved me from a loneliness I didn't even know was killing me." Dahlia reached up to touch his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "And you saved us, in every way that matters." Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Dahlia proving to have a good head for business that complemented Xander's practical knowledge. The children thrived, growing and learning, gradually shedding the wariness that had marked them when they first arrived. Word came from Denver that Richards had been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, his smuggling operation dismantled, and his assets seized. The news brought final closure to the fear that had driven Dahlia to Xander's stable that winter night. On the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting, Xander surprised Dahlia with a gift, a small gold locket containing miniature portraits of the children. "To replace the one you left behind when you fled," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "So you'll always have them close to your heart." Dahlia touched the locket, her eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful, but I have something for you too." She took his hand, placing it gently on her stomach. "A new addition to our family coming next spring." Xander's eyes widened, joy and disbelief warring on his face. You're certain, she nodded, smiling through her tears. The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday. Emma and Thomas will have a little brother or sister. That night, as the children slept upstairs and the wind whispered around the house they'd made into a home, Xander held his wife close, marveling at the turns his life had taken. When I built this place, he said softly, I thought it was just for me, a solitary refuge after everything I'd lost. And now, Dahlia asked, her head on his chest, now I know it was never meant to be just mine. It was waiting all this time for you, for all of us. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the land in white just as it had the night Dahlia and her children had sought shelter in a stranger's stable. But this time, there was no fear, no uncertainty, only the warmth of family and the promise of a future built together, one day at a time. Forever, Xander whispered, echoing the word Emma had spoken at their wedding. That's how long you get to stay. Dahlia smiled, nestling closer. Forever sounds just about right. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and the ranch flourished, they often reflected on that snowy night, the night a desperate woman and two frightened children found not just shelter, but a home. The night a lonely cowboy discovered that the family he'd never thought to have had been waiting for him all along. Forever, it turned out, was only the beginning.